Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always an honour and a privilege to rise in the House of Commons and speak on behalf of the residents of Vaughan Woodbridge. However, today I rise to speak on behalf of Canadians. Canadians across this country who are watching their choices being stripped away by a government that feels it should exercise more and more control over your life. Canadians who are watching their costs of living rise and once again going to be faced with even more rising costs because of this ideologically driven agenda by this Liberal government. This should not be a partisan issue. At a time when Canadian auto workers are facing unjustified tariffs from our neighbours south of the border and significant job losses are happening across the country, with unemployment the highest it's been in decades outside the pandemic, our Conservative motion is a common sense motion and one the government should adopt. I mean, it's not like it's outside of their scope to recognize and course correct when they introduce bad policy. They did it when they recognized the Conservatives were right and repealed the consumer carbon tax, for example. For those watching at home, here is what the Conservative motion says that we're debating today. It reads that given that the Liberal government is banning the sale of gas-powered vehicles, which will force Canadians to buy electric vehicles, and this mandate will drive up the cost of vehicles by up to $20,000, this House calls on the government to immediately end the ban on gas-powered vehicles so Canadians can buy the cars that suits their needs and budget. This is not about whether someone can or should buy an electric vehicle. If you want one, great, you should buy one. What we do oppose is the government taking away consumer choice. What we oppose is the government thinking it knows best, and what we oppose is a government mandate that has negative impacts on our economy and cost of living. Make no mistake, that's what this mandate does. It doesn't encourage EV use, it bans gas-powered vehicles altogether by 2035. It forces quotas on manufacturers during a time when they're facing tariffs from our neighbours to the south, and it punishes Canadians with higher prices if they dare to choose something different during a time when most Canadians can barely afford groceries, their rent, or their car insurance. So here's what's happening. Starting in 2026, automakers will be forced to ensure 20% of their sales are zero-emission vehicles. That target ramps up to 60% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. This is a radical government-mandated phase-out of gas-powered vehicles. It's ridiculous and ideologically driven. This mandate doesn't care if you live in an urban area like Toronto or a rural community like Northern BC. There's no consideration of the impact on cost, no thought of the impact to automotive manufacturers and the consequences on major automotive manufacturers and their workers. What about those who commute long distances to and from work, in the cold, where the battery life is barely half? Mr. Speaker, this isn't about opposing EVs. Far from it. I was in an EV and drove from Vaughan to Ottawa. We had to drive 15 minutes out of the way to find a charger, to charge it in the summer, and that took about 30 minutes. Imagine it was minus 30 outside, how many times you would have to stop because of how dead your battery would be. How about the grid and the infrastructure required to support it? Mr. Speaker, we are far from being ready for that. We would need nearly 700,000 charging ports from coast to coast. We have about 60,000 now. This would require radical transformation that, especially given the Liberals' track record for getting things done, is next to impossible to achieve in the next 10 years. We are installing fewer and fewer charges year over year, not more and more. We would need over $600 billion in new infrastructure to support this. I mean, these are the same guys who put billions into a housing accelerator fund only to create more government bureaucracy with no results. And oh, it gets even better. Mr. Speaker, only radical environmentalists could think of a scheme where if automakers don't meet their quota, they are faced with a $20,000 penalty per vehicle if they're short of their targets. Let me repeat that, $20,000 tax per vehicle, which will absolutely be passed on to the consumers in the form of higher vehicle prices. It's not rocket science. This isn't a climate plan. It's a tax plan, and it's a control plan, one that perfectly highlights everything that has been wrong with this Liberal government over the last decade. This mandate will have devastating consequences, not just for consumers, but for workers and for the Canadian auto sector. A study published in the Canadian Journal of Economics estimates that the mandate will eliminate 38,000 jobs in the auto sector and cost the economy $138.7 billion. Even auto industry leaders, those investing in EVs, are sounding the alarm. Last week, while at the Canadian Automotive Summit hosted in my hometown of Vaughan, Bev Goodman, the CEO of Ford Canada, said the mandate will have a negative impact, downward pressure on sales, upward pressure on pricing, and real concerns for consumers in the industry. Furthermore, Kristen Aquilina, president of GM Canada, said it's unrealistic to believe that the country is going to go from 5 to 6% of EV vehicle sales to 20% by 2026. So that will force us to have to restrict the ability to sell gas-powered vehicles. And you got to think about the dealership jobs all around the country relying on those sales, and the manufacturing jobs that are also relying on those sales. Brian Kingston, the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, said the federal EV mandate needs to be repealed before serious damage is done to the auto industry at the worst possible time. These aren't political voices. They're industry leaders who want EVs to succeed, but who are being asked to do the impossible on an unrealistic timeline in a market that isn't ready. Mr. Speaker, Canadians aren't buying EVs in large numbers because they can't afford them. Right now, demand for EVs is stalling at about 8% to 10% of new car sales in Canada, and they remain, on average, $15,000 more expensive than comparable gas vehicles. And that's even after taxpayer-funded subsidies. And those subsidies, they don't come from thin air. They come from Canadians' pockets. So even if you don't drive an EV, you're paying for someone else's. But wait, it gets worse. Once these quotas and penalties take effect, automakers will raise their prices on gas-powered vehicles to offset the cost of compliance. This means everyone pays more, even those who can't or won't buy an EV. The CAA found that electric vehicles lose up to 40% of their battery life in cold conditions, as mild as -7 to -15 degrees. Yes, that's mild in this country. What does this mean for Canadians in Winnipeg, Thunder Bay, or rural Alberta, where winters last half the year? EVs are not a universal solution. And the grid? Our provincial grids are already strained. Ontario Hydro, Hydro-Quebec, and BC Hydro are warning of growing demand and rising cost. What happens when we go from 8% EVs to 100%? The Liberals have no answer. Their plan is more debt, more subsidies, more taxes, and more big shiny announcements. Let's not forget the role of the Prime Minister, who seems to be the architect of much of this ideological shift. Back in 2021, in his book Values, he wrote that we need regulations to phase out the sale of new gas vehicles in the next decade. At the Council on Foreign Relations, he talked about using regulation to shape consumer behavior through bans, quotas, and carbon taxes. He even praised Europe's ban as the model that should be replicated right here in Canada. If Liberals truly believe in reducing emissions, they'd unleash Canadian innovation, they'd support hybrid options, cleaner fuels, and the development of Canadian oil and gas with lower emissions, rather than dirty dictator oil to arbitrarily offset emissions. They'd back nuclear. They'd invest in charging networks before mandating bans. They'd trust the market. Instead, they'd chosen top-down mandates, higher prices, and fewer choices. The people hurt the most. The single mom in Vaughan trying to afford a used Civic. The tradesman in Hamilton who hauls heavy equipment. These are the people the Liberals forgot. These are the people that we're standing up for. Mr. Speaker, a Conservative will repeal the EV mandate, scrap the industrial carbon tax, eliminate fuel standards that punish working people, support innovation through freedom and competition, not coercion. Most importantly, we'll let Canadians choose the vehicle that works best for them. Gas, hybrid, diesel, electric, whatever. Without judgment, without penalties, or government overreach. Mr. Speaker, it's time to put Canadians back in the driver's seat. I urge all members of this House to support this motion. Let's stand up for choice, for affordability, for common sense, and for the millions of Canadians who deserve better than a government that tells them what to drive, how to live, and what to think. Let's repeal the mandate, let's end the ban, and let's bring home control over our cars, our choices, and our lives. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's some days where I think I'm living in a South Park episode, where there's reality versus weird conspiracy theory nonsense. The entire world is transitioning to an electric economy, but the carbon conservatives, they just want to do nothing. The McMaster Automotive Resource Centre in Hamilton is world-leading electric vehicle technology, working with every major manufacturer in the world. But the Conservative solution, oh, let's just do nothing. The entire market, if we do nothing, will be taken over by high-tech, inexpensive Chinese EV imports. So will the members support Canadian industry and Canadian workers and take action, or are they supporting Communist China's imports?
I'm a member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, same old Liberals, just another day. So, no one is talking about not investing in technology or developing industry. What we're opposing here is a mandate to remove the sale of gas-powered vehicles. A mandate opposed by industry leaders. A mandate opposed by industry experts. And a mandate that will be opposed by Canadians as they see their costs rise at a time when they're already struggling to make ends meet.
Question and commentaire. Question.
Questions and
The honourable member for Niagara South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to formulate a coherent response to what I just heard across the way, but yeah, good luck with that. But I appreciate the member's speech, and I wonder, triggered by this comment about EVs, I wonder if the member might give us some perspective on his view of what Chinese EVs mean in our marketplace and why this government actually raised a tariff on Chinese EVs, and what that means to us in our marketplace, particularly in our domestic market where a lot of these plants are actually not even opening.
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Well, so the issue with China, obviously, when they flood our marketplace with electric vehicle technology, is it puts our own industry, auto industry, at a competitive disadvantage. So from my perspective, and I think the perspective of most people connected to the auto industry, steel, oil and gas, yes, we want to support Canadian markets, support the technologies, the Canadian-made technologies in those industries. But again, I'll kind of go back to what I was saying in my speech there. The whole purpose of the opposition to this is by forcing and mandating car companies to shift to the production of EV vehicles, we're going to create conditions where not only jobs are lost, but cars are more expensive.
Question and commentaire.
the honourable member for Rimouski-Lamatampedia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Quebec, we have chose to ban gas-powered vehicles by 2030. That's our choice. That's our future. It's our autonomy. Why are the Conservatives so bent on imposing their oil-based vision on Quebec?
For Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, because the Conservative Party we have the best interests of Quebecers in mind when considering this policy choice. We're worried about the increased cost to their pocketbook. We're worried about the increased cost to their families, the jobs lost in their industry. So this is why we will continue to oppose these mandates and stand up for Canadian workers.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like the member to be very clear on this issue, and I've raised it now on a couple of occasions. It appears that the Conservative Party, no surprise, Pierre Poilievre, says that we should not provide any form of incentives, we should not provide any sort of subsidy with respect to the EV industry. Is that something in which that member supports, or is Pierre Poilievre wrong?
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, we keep hearing about subsidies for EV when what we're talking about here is mandating the ban of gas-powered vehicles, which will drive costs and create more stress on an already stressed citizenry of our country. So, of course, we're going to oppose the ban of oil and gas vehicle production because we stand behind Canadians.